Hello to you, and thank you for taking the time to watch this fairly short workshop and an introduction to therapeutic writing. I greet you this morning from a little seaside town in Port Alfred, where I live. I am a narrative counselor, and if you don't know much about narrative, that's okay. You will learn as you go along, or of course, you can always Google. I also am convinced that therapeutic writing and narrative therapy go really well together. So I'll be explaining a little bit of how that happens in the next couple of slides. As a taster for some of my longer workshops that are coming up, which you will be able to find on my website, I'm going to give you a free, very short writing exercise after I've explained what writing therapy and what narrative therapy are about and how they go together. So, narrative therapy, some basics on stories. Whenever we hear the word narrative, we think about a story. And usually, when people are in a narrative therapy, it's usually talk therapy, the way that most therapy is, although, of course, there's always art, drama, dance, there are all sorts of therapies. But when we hear the word narrative, we think about story. Now, each of us tells some kind of story about who we are and what our life is about. And we all have multiple stories, and the longer we live, the more stories we have. We live stories of our past, we live our current stories, and we also often tell our stories of what we hope for the future. Our past stories are the ones that are often very, very much involved in shaping our present and in shaping our present stories. When we tell our stories, and we don't always say, now I'm going to tell you a story, but when we start speaking to others about ourselves, or when we talk to ourselves about ourselves, we find that our stories have themes. Some of them are tragic, some romantic, and some are fictional adventures of what we may have done or what we would like to do. In our stories, we are the hero at times, and at other times, we are the anti-hero in the story. And all our stories change over time as we mature, as we have different experiences, as we get different insights into our lives, we will find that our stories change. They also change depending on the mood we are in when we tell something about ourselves. And very much, I think, our stories in their telling are adapted to who our listeners are. Our interpretations of our stories and our experiences can dictate who we are. Our stories are never linear, but are strewn with chapters, paragraphs, and sentences. They don't happen the way that somebody neatly writes out their biography. There are always twists and turns, and we tell a little bit of it here and a little bit of it there. We might even hear ourselves, or we hear others saying, oh, well, that's just the story of my life. And we also then believe that if that is the story of my life, there's nothing I can do about it. I simply have to live with it. And sometimes we follow the storylines that we have lived with. So if we have a storyline that we've been the person who's always been the helper, has never been helped, that storyline of being the helper might continue throughout our lives in all of our relationships and our jobs. And our stories, the storylines, and all these events and the interpretations of them give us a self-image. They create a self-image. But there comes a time when we may realize that our stories are really no longer relevant. They're old stories. They no longer fit with who we are now. We also might come to understand that our stories have sometimes been written by other people for us without our permission and without consulting us. A story has been written and we've lived it. And we come to realize that we would prefer to live another story of our lives. And this is where narrative therapy comes in, because we believe as narrative therapists that our life stories, no matter what's happened in the past, we can find an alternate or a new story. We either leave the other one behind, or we go and have a look at it and we say, is that the way the story really happened? Or is there another aspect to that story? And we then become the authors of our own stories, and then we re-author, we rewrite our stories. And this is where narrative therapy teams up with therapeutic writing. A favorite writer of mine, Joan Didion, an altogether wise woman, wrote, "I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking. I write what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear." If you'd like to, pause the video now and read that again for yourself and see what stands out for you in that quote from Joan Didion, where she is talking about why she writes and what writing does for her. Julie Bolton is a teacher of therapeutic writing, and she writes, "Sometimes we write to survive, sometimes we write to remember, and sometimes we write for discovery." That also might be something you'd like to read over before continuing. Hannah Arendt, a philosopher, talks about the power of a story and the power of our life story. And she says the story of our lives reveals the meaning of what otherwise would remain an unbearable sequence of sheer happenings. In other words, our lives can get cohesion when we write about them, rather than just being a smattering or a scattering, a shattering of a whole lot of things that happened to us. Reauthoring, you might say, oh, we can't change the past. No, we can't. But as narrative therapists, through curious questioning of the accepted stories, the descriptions, the assumptions that have been given to us and that we've lived with, if we question them, our questions can give us insight. They can reveal things to us, and we discover new things about our past, our present, and what we would prefer for our future. We discover that we have different truths. We have maybe different memories, different preferences, different ideals to those that we had in the past. And it's time for transformation, or it's time to admit that during that time, that wasn't what we preferred, but we didn't know how to make it different. And so we find that there are stories in our lives that no longer serve a purpose. And in a sense, we can close those books. Now, what is therapeutic writing? Various forms of writing are obviously therapeutic. Journaling, diaries, letters, memoir, fiction. And many of you would be familiar with Julia Cameron's lovely work on morning pages. Sometimes we write just to get things down, and that's enough, especially if we find we cannot actually speak the words, perhaps to the person or out loud. There just isn't that space for the oral. And so we write. Some people write regularly, some write infrequently, and some write just when they need to. And therapeutic writing, as opposed from other kinds of writing, it is not about being a good writer. A therapeutic writing course is not to teach people how to choose just the right words, just the right phrase to express themselves clearly and correctly. And therapeutic writing can be done on your own, or it can be done in a group. It could even be done in emails with your therapist, which is something that I do. A therapeutic writing workshop, it's not about how to become a writer. As I've said, my job is not anywhere near good enough in writing to teach people how to write. And it's not a writing workshop. It's also not a counseling session. So when people join a therapeutic writing course, you're not joining me for me to give you individual attention. This is a group effort, and today's exercise is just between you and the page. So it's not that. But what a therapeutic writing workshop is it's an invitation to use writing to find meaning, to express our feelings, to be creative with words if we want to find our voices. And it uses various forms of writing, as some of them I've mentioned. And the ones that I work with always have questions after each exercise that are designed for the writer to find deeper meaning in what has been written. And here's some good news for those of you who are concerned about your writing ability. Therapeutic writing does not require that the rules of grammar are to be followed. It doesn't care about spelling, and it always allows any language to be used. You can swear if you like, you can do whatever you like, it's yours. So please don't feel that you have your very admired, perhaps English teacher leaning over your shoulder and criticizing what it is that you are writing and the way in which you are writing. Because in therapeutic writing, it's just the writer and the page. And here's something I found interesting also from Jilly Bolton. The page is never shocked, it's never judgmental, it's not bored, it doesn't get angry, and it doesn't get distressed. So if you are interested in trying out some therapeutic writing, then please continue watching. Here's our short therapeutic writing exercise. What follows is a guided workshop for you to do on your own, because I'm not there to facilitate, or with someone else if you need a companion. You'll have to stop the recording at various points so as to work at your own pace. Turn off your phone, give yourself some uninterrupted time, take out your paper and pen, take 3 really deep breaths in and out, and continue. The title of the exercise for today is Peeling Off the Labels. And here's a little user warning for therapeutic writing, and there is what is called the flip out rule. If during your time of writing you find that your emotions are becoming heightened to a point where you cannot manage, then flip out of the writing. If you think you're going to flip out of the writing. Just stop. Find someone to be with, go and have a cup of coffee, and if you like, come back and start writing on the same subject again, or just choose something else. If you are at all worried about that, please just start writing something that you know is not as traumatic as perhaps the burning issue that you want to write about today. So labels, what are they for? They tell us what the contents or the ingredients are of a tin, a bottle, a packet of food, and we're becoming more and more aware, aren't we, of reading that fine print, especially as we are on the lookout for allergens and things that we are intolerant of. We look at labels to check the size, to see if I'm going home with the right size garment. We also check labels to find how much things cost, and we look for other information, perhaps about where the article has been made. But labels that are stuck on us, is there a label stuck on you? Are there labels on us? Sometimes when we see other people, in fact always, we read the label. So we look at what they are wearing. We might look at the color of their skin. We look at their hair. We look at all sorts of things, and we make a judgment according to the label that we read on the other person. And then sometimes we think, oh, that person, because he or she looks like that, speaks like that, dresses like that, behaves like that, must be and then we add a label. And very often we are surprised because we find that what we read is not actually what's inside. And we've been labeled, whether we like it or not. We are also labeled. And some of the labels that have been given to us over time have been helpful, and some of them have been unhelpful. So our labels are what people give us when they tell stories about us. Think about perhaps when a parent or a teacher has said something about you when you were a child and they labeled you as whatever. And that tells other people the story about who we are from that label. So we're going to look at our sticky labels today. And what I'd like you to do in this very first section is just to write down a list of as many labels that you can think of that have been used to describe you. No judgment on them, no history, no where they came from, no who gave them to you. Just write down a list. So pause the video and make your list, and then when your list is complete, pick up again. Now you've got your list. It's time to read your list, and I'd like you to choose 3 that have been in some way hurtful, unkind, unwarranted, damaging, discouraging, unfair, or that have had some negative effects on you. Because the purpose of this exercise is not to write about all the lovely labels that have given to us. You might like to do that another time to give you encouragement and hope. But today it's to look at some of the labels that have been put on us that have had negative effects. So choose 3, pause the video, choose your 3, and then click to start again. Now you've got 3, now you're going to pick 1. So look at the 3 you have chosen, and without writing anything down, just think, were you surprised by the choice that you made? Which one do you dislike the most? Which one have you lived with the longest? And then, importantly for our exercise today, which one do you think is asking to be considered by you today? Which is the one that stands out for you, that needs attention today? And this one will be the one that you write about today. So please remember that flip out rule. Choose something that you can manage today. Pause the video, choose, and remember the flip out rule. Now that you've made your choice, I'm going to ask you to write about why this label at this time. If a label has been around with us for a very long time, we get used to it, and we might have even forgotten about it. But somehow, on certain days, a label comes to us and says, I think we need to talk. So consider why this label. Did something happen recently? Was something happening in a dream? Why did this label come to mind? And write a few sentences about why you think the reasons are for this label to come up at this point in your life. Pause, write, and start again when you are ready. Now, in narrative therapy, one of the issues that we deal with very strongly is we believe that the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem is the problem. And we make a conscious effort to separate a person from an experience or from a problem or from a predicament. And we call this internalizing. And Sharon Salzberg uses a little cartoon from Lucy and Charlie Brown in the Peanuts comic to explain this. Lucy is sitting in her little counseling booth, and Charlie Brown comes up to her and he starts telling her about his problem. And Lucy listens, and then in her own inimitable way, Lucy says, the problem with you, Charlie Brown, is that you are you. Charlie Brown then looks quizzical and says, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And dear Lucy, bless her, says, I'm only here to give, I'm not here to give advice. I'm here to point out what the problem is. And we often have a Lucy in us, that voice that says, you're the problem. I don't know how you're going to solve it, but you are the problem. But if we externalize problems, we take them out of ourselves and have a look at them, they are easier for us to deal with and perhaps for us to bring change. It's when we believe a problem is forever embedded within us that it becomes very difficult to deal with change in our lives, because we feel we are the problem. Now I'm going to ask you to write about the label, and the following exercise will help give some insight into this label. Go one step at a time, pausing the video and starting up again each time you have finished. So writing about it is going to be written not as if it is you. So you're not going to write, I am angry, but you might say, anger often comes into my life. That's when this happens. So we externalize it. Anger, pain, frustration, whatever. Think about what your label is and write about it as though it's not part of you. It is its own entity. So write for as long as you like. And this is a list of prompts. Name. So let's say it's anger. Name. You first came into my life. You were given to me by, because somebody might have said to you, oh, you are such an angry person. And then they go, so-and-so is angry. And when that label was given to you, it might be one that was even much more hurtful. At the time, I felt. You might say to the label, you have been used to. In other words, you have been used to pushing me around. You've been used to making me lose my temper. I've tried to overcome you. And then perhaps you write about the ways in which you have tried not to live up to or down to the label that you've been given. You stay with me because, and that might be an interesting answer, I accepted you because. Why did we allow that label to stay on us for so long? But I don't like the way that you. And if it were not for you, I. Now this is when we look and think about, you know what, if it hadn't been for this label that I was given, my life may have been different in some way. Now it's time to peel off the label. You've written about the label. Now you're going to peel it off. And glue, anything with glue sticks like glue. Labels have clung to objects and to people. And when we pull them off, there's often a mark where it used to be. And so when we pull the labels off ourselves that have been stuck to us, there may be a sore spot, and there may always be a scar, a mark where that has been. And we might feel a bit weird about saying to ourselves, now I'm peeling off a label. But resolve to peel it off. Once you've made your resolve and you've noted the origin and the effects of the label in that list where you wrote about it, with kindness, write a letter to yourself. And I stress the word kindness. Write this letter to yourself in which you give yourself permission to peel off the label. So I would write, dear Linda, today I give you permission to peel off the label of whatever it is that I carry. Let yourself know how hard this label has been to get rid of, because sometimes we're unforgiving of ourselves and think, why did you live with this for so long? But I might say, Linda, I know it's been difficult for you to get rid of this label because, and then I will tell myself why I no longer deserve it. It was given to me at a time by somebody else that is no longer relevant, and I'm no longer like that. And I don't want to be like that, or it never fitted, and so I'm peeling it off. So remember kindness. And then, once you've given yourself permission and you've told yourself that this label needs to go and why you don't deserve it, then in the next half of your letter, move to hope and write to yourself about how your life is going to be without it. So you might say, now that anger, whatever it is, has been taken from me, I think my life is going to be better in the following ways. I look forward to blah, blah, blah. Name others in your letter who you might need to tell you are no longer wearing the label. Sometimes those people may not be around us anymore. Sometimes those people may have passed on. But we name them and say, so and so, you gave me the label, but I'm giving it back, or I refuse to wear it any longer. And that brings us to the end of our short workshop. If you would like to join a workshop, a therapeutic writing workshop, please go to my website for details, and there it is, onlinetherapywithlinda.com. Some of you might have done this exercise and thought, it might be nice to get a group of people together and do this. If you'd like to set up one of my writing workshops, not this one, but another one, please also go to my website and you can contact me through that, and we can set up a time for me to facilitate a longer workshop. And if you would like to book an appointment for an individual therapy session, please contact me on that same website. And so thank you for your time and goodbye. I apologize for the cat moving in and out, which distracted me, but that's what happens when we work from home these days. Goodbye, go well, and good writing.